You don't belong here, old man. The voice sliced through the quiet hum of the cafe like a razor silencing conversations and freezing forks midair. Brandon Wells, dressed in a designer hoodie and flanked by two fraternity brothers, stood holding a steaming cup of coffee, his gaze locked on a man slumped in the corner booth. The man didn't respond. He didn't even stir. He was asleep, his calloused hands folded loosely on the table, his breathing slow and even. Raymond Clark, 67, sat in the same booth he always did after his graveyard shift at the shipping depot. His flannel shirt was faded, his boots scuffed and tired but neatly laced. A small, tarnished purple heart pin sat just below his collarbone, an honor few recognized and even fewer respected anymore. But Brandon didn't see a veteran. He saw an inconvenience. "Watch this," Brandon muttered, smirking as he held the coffee cup high. "No, don't," one of his friends whispered, but it was too late. With a flick of his wrist, Brandon poured the scalding hot coffee directly onto the sleeping man's head. The cafe gasped, cups clattered. Raymond jerked upright with a guttural sound, his marine instincts flaring to life even before his vision cleared. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on the now empty cup dripping from the table's edge. The burns hurt, but not as much as the humiliation. Not as much as the silence from the watching crowd. The coffee soaked his flannel and stung his eyes. Still, Raymond didn't move to retaliate. Decades of discipline rooted him to the seat. Brandon laughed and tossed the cup into the trash. Maybe now he'll find a sidewalk to nap on. The cafe was still. Not a soul moved. Not even Mrs. Gallagher, the cafe owner, who had stepped away to check the lunch deliveries. Raymond slowly reached for a napkin, wiping the liquid from his weathered face. His hands trembling, not from fear but exhaustion, worked quietly as he blinked against the heat. He didn't look at Brandon, he didn't say a word, but inside something deeper stirred. Just a few hours earlier, Raymond had been hauling crates onto trucks in the frigid night to keep food on the table for his dismal daughter and her two young grandkids. He hadn't complained, he never did. Not when he got home and found the heater broken. Not when he had to skip his medication to afford Sarah's. This cafe booth had become his only refuge. Now it had become his battlefield. And this time the enemy wasn't carrying a rifle, it was entitlement dressed in luxury sneakers. What no one in that cafe realized not yet was that the man soaking in silence wasn't just another face in the crowd. He had once saved lives with his own hands. And now someone else's hands had just changed everything. The cafe had fallen completely silent. All eyes were on the booth where 67-year-old Raymond Clark sat drenched in hot coffee, humiliation burning hotter than any scald on his skin. His shoulders, though weathered by decades of labor and combat, were still squared. His hands stained with calluses, and time moved slowly to wipe the liquid from his face with the last dry napkin on the table. Brandon Wells, cocky rich and completely unaware of the fire he had just lit, grinned smugly. "Maybe next time," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you'll think twice before napping in a place meant for paying customers." Before Raymond could respond, a woman from the far side of the cafe stood up fast. Her chair scraped sharply against the floor. "Excuse me," she said, voice tight with outrage. Brandon turned, eyebrows raised. Vanessa Cruz was not someone easily ignored. Middle-aged, composed with a VA badge clipped to her blazer, she crossed the cafe in long, purposeful strides. "You just assaulted a veteran," she said flatly, "and I'm calling someone who's going to want to have a word with you." She pulled out her phone and walked past Brandon without another glance, dialing with trembling fingers. Her voice dropped, low, urgent. "Colonel Tran, it's Vanessa. We've got a situation. A vet's been assaulted at the daily grind. Yes, he's here. Raymond Clark, you remember the name?" The swinging door burst open and out came Mrs. Gallagher, the cafe's longtime owner, apron dusted with flour. Her face flushed with fury. "What in the holy hell is going on in my cafe?" When she saw Raymond wet, humiliated, trying to sit with dignity, despite it all, her face darkened. "Raymond," she breathed. Then turning toward Brandon, "Did you do this?" Brandon opened his mouth, but no words came. The tone in her voice had changed the room's entire energy. "He was sleeping in my booth," Brandon said finally, but the justification was paper thin now. "I was making a point." "It was a joke." Mrs. Gallagher walked straight up to him, planting herself like an oak in front of a wildfire. That man, she hissed, is more decent than you'll ever understand. He's worked night shifts to raise his grandkids. He's a Purple Heart recipient, and you poured coffee on him. There was a collective gasp from the cafe. The bell over the door chimed. Everyone turned. In stepped Colonel Jacob Tran. Late 50s spine like a steel rod, his tailored blazer didn't hide the military bearing that marked him immediately as someone not to be trifled with. His eyes scanned the cafe with calm intensity. When he spotted Raymond, his expression shifted from neutral to deeply concerned. "Raymond," he said, walking swiftly to the booth. "My God, are you all right?" Raymond looked up stunned. "Jacob, it's been years." The colonel turned to Mrs. Gallagher and Vanessa. "Tell me exactly what happened." Vanessa filled him in, every word, every cruel gesture. Tran's face remained hard as stone. He looked to Brandon, who was now starting to fidget, the first signs of fear slipping into his expression. "Son, the colonel said you didn't just humiliate a man. You attacked a Marine." Brandon's jaw clenched. "I didn't know he was—" "And that's the problem," Tran cut in. "You never stopped to ask." The door swung open again. This time it was Greg Wells, Brandon's father. Power suit, phone still in his hand. He looked confused and slightly out of breath, clearly having rushed here. "What's going on?" he demanded. "I just got a call." Then he saw Raymond. Greg's voice caught in his throat. "Raymond," he said, stunned, his face drained of color. Raymond stood slowly, soaking wet but composed. "Greg Wells," he said softly, "2nd Marine Expeditionary, 2008, Fallujah." Greg took a step back, his hand trembling. I thought you were killed in action. You, you saved my life." The room stood still. Brandon's head whipped toward his father. "Wait, what?" Greg ignored him, his eyes were locked on Raymond. "You pulled me out of a burning Humvee. I never got to thank you. I wouldn't be alive if not for you." And then something happened. No one expected. Greg Wells, billionaire businessman, untouchable in every room he walked into, dropped to one knee in front of the soaked, exhausted veteran. "I owe you everything," Greg said. "My life, my family, even him." He gestured toward Brandon. Brandon took a step back, his face pale. "Dad, I didn't know." Greg rose slowly and turned, his voice laced with fury and heartbreak. "You didn't know because you never cared to look. You judged a man by his clothes. You thought humiliation made you powerful. Instead, you just attacked the man who gave you life, literally." Colonel Tran stepped forward. "I'll be filing reports with the VA and veteran advocacy boards, and I'm also contacting law enforcement. There will be consequences." Miss Gallagher crossed her arms. "He's banned. Permanently." Vanessa nodded. "And I'll make sure every veterans group in the state hears about this." Brandon looked around. No one stood with him now, not even his father. And at the center of it all, Raymond Clark remained still quiet, not out of weakness, but because he knew something the others had only just learned, that real strength never has to raise its voice. Greg Wells stood frozen at the entrance of the cafe, his breath catching as he locked eyes with the man seated in the corner booth, soaked in coffee, still calm despite the humiliation. The years had changed him, sure, but not enough to erase the memory. "Raymond," he said barely above a whisper. "Raymond Clark." Room fell into a stunned silence. All the chaos, the gas, the phone still recording it all, seemed to dissolve into the background as Greg stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. Raymond looked up slowly, eyes narrowing as he tried to place the man's voice. Then something clicked. "Wells," he said, then almost as if asking himself. "Greg Wells from Fallujah." Greg nodded, his voice thick with emotion. 15 years ago, I was in the 2nd Humvee. I was trapped. The flames were everywhere and the fuel line had just blown. Everyone thought we were done for except you. You didn't hesitate. You dragged me out while rounds were snapping over our heads." Brandon, who had been watching this unfold in growing horror, suddenly stepped forward, trying to speak. "Wait, what?" he stammered. "You know this guy?" Greg turned to his son slowly, the color drained from his face. "Brandon, you were named after him. Your full name is Brandon Raymond Wells. I named you after the man who saved my life. That man is the reason I ever came home." the reason you exist. The cafe fell completely silent. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Even the hum of the espresso machine seemed to fade into nothing. All eyes turned to Brandon, who just hours ago had strutted into this cafe full of arrogance and entitlement and now stood speechless, his mouth slightly open, unable to reconcile the truth. Mrs. Gallagher clutched a towel in her hands, trembling. Vanessa Cruz, the VA worker who had seen the entire assault unfold, lowered her phone slowly. Her eyes were on Raymond, but her expression was unreadable, somewhere between heartbreak and admiration. Brandon backed up a step, shaking his head. "I didn't know," he whispered, almost pleading. "I didn't know who he was." Greg's voice cracked as he turned fully toward his son. "You didn't care to know. You saw a tired old man and assumed he was worthless. You poured scalding coffee on the man who gave me a second chance at life. You humiliated your own namesake." The young man's legs faltered. He slumped into a nearby chair, eyes locked on the floor, shame flooding every inch of him. For once, Brandon Wells, the golden boy, the heir to one of the city's largest logistics empires, had nothing to say. Raymond, still soaked and trembling, slightly from both the burn and the emotional weight, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, steady, and carried the authority of a man who had seen war and lived through its consequences. "I didn't save your father for recognition. I didn't even remember his name until just now. I did it because it was the right thing to do. That's what Marines do. We don't leave people behind, even the ones who don't remember what that means." Greg's eyes brimmed with tears. "Raymond, I've thought about you every single day since that mission. I've tried to find you. When I couldn't, I named my son after you, hoping he'd grow up to be half the man you are." He paused, looking back at Brandon with sadness. "But I failed to teach him what really matters." Colonel Tran stepped forward, the ribbons on his uniform catching the cafe lights. His expression was somber, his eyes fixed on Brandon. "This cafe has just witnessed something few Americans get to see. The cost of freedom isn't just measured in deployments or medals, it's measured in what people like Sergeant Raymond Clark carry for the rest of their lives." Then he turned to the room. "And the way we treat them is the measure of who we are as a society." The cafe, once buzzing with voices, now held only reverence. A group of high schoolers who had been sitting near the door had stopped recording and simply stared in awe. One of them eyes wide-mouthed Raymond's name as if seeing a ghost. Greg placed a hand gently on Raymond's shoulder. "Let me make this right. Whatever you need, housing support for your daughter, help for your grandkids, consider it done." Raymond looked up at him, his jaw set. "I don't want charity, Greg. I never did. I've made it this far by working for everything. But I will accept your help, if it's offered in respect, not pity." Greg nodded solemnly. "You have my word. It's not pity, it's gratitude, 15 years overdue." Behind them, Brandon finally stood, his voice shaking. "Mr. Clark, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't understand." Raymond stared at him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Now you do." Brandon Wells sat in stunned silence as the weight of what he'd done settled in. He had humiliated a man who not only saved his father's life in a war zone, but had inspired his very name. The cafe's atmosphere was thick with both shame and something more powerful, respect. In that moment, consequences were no longer abstract. They were real. Legal repercussions unfolded almost as quickly as the revelations themselves. Colonel Tran, steady and resolute, leaned in and spoke quietly but firmly. "Mr. Wells, I'm filing a report with the authorities. This is assault." Over the next few hours, news of the incident circulated through local channels and VA networks. Soon, Brandon found himself facing actual assault charges and, to his surprise, a requirement to perform community service at the VA hospital he had mocked just hours earlier. As dawn broke the next day, local television captured a scene that would be replayed countless times. Brandon, he had bowed, shaking hands with VA staff, his uniformed assistants ironically underscoring a form of restitution he couldn't yet fully grasp. Meanwhile, at the heart of it all, Raymond Clark, still shaken but unbroken, found his life taking a remarkable turn. Greg Wells had approached him the evening before with a proposal both unexpected and sincere: a management position at Wells Logistics, with full benefits for Raymond and accommodations for his daughter Sarah and grandchildren. Raymond listened quietly, eyes steady, and said simply, I'll take it. That decision would change everything for his family. The transformation rippled through the community. Mrs. Gallagher, the cafe owner, whose Irish heart had erupted in fury the day before, made a bold announcement to her staff and the few lingering patrons. We're instituting a new policy, veterans always welcome. It would be posted by the door soon. She promised a small, powerful reminder that respect for service should never be optional. Word of the incident and of the cafe's new policy spread through the neighborhood. The next morning as the sun rose, a lineup of veterans poured into the cafe, tipping hats and nodding in quiet gratitude as they settled into that corner booth once occupied only by bread and coffee stains. The booth was now clearly marked Raymond's table, a simple plaque hung above it. At the VA hospital where Brandon completed his hours, Raymond visited one afternoon to find groups of young veterans huddled around him listening to his stories of resilience, compassion, and quiet toughness. In the lounge there, a poster quoting him hung in bold letters, "We don't kneel for recognition. We stand so others get home." For Raymond, the job at Wells Logistics meant more than a paycheck. It meant stability, respect, and eventually a chance to truly care for Sarah and his grandchildren. The wage was decent, the benefits comprehensive, and the message behind it was clear: valor earned still mattered. As the weeks passed, the story continued to resonate. Local veterans organizations invited Raymond to speak. Through him, they reminded community after community that heroes often pass unnoticed. In schools, teachers told students the tale of Raymond Clark. Men like him didn't ask for medals, but they deserved them. In senior centers, groups quietly wept as they watched footage of the coffee-stained war hero receiving his just dues. Brandon, once consumed by guilt, began his path toward redemption. He performed his VA community service with humility, learning about veteran struggles, even offering to help transport people to medical appointments. One day he approached Raymond and apologized again earnestly and humbly. Raymond nodded. "Only way forward," he said softly. The New York Times published a short feature under the headline, "From Humiliation to Honor: How a Cafe Incident Sparked a Community's Reckoning." They interviewed Mrs. Gallagher, who now served free coffee to any veteran every Tuesday at Raymond's table. They interviewed Raymond himself, who spoke not with pride, but with quiet dignity. "All I really wanted was a cup of coffee in peace." In the final scenes, as summer turned into fall, the plaque above Raymond's booth was freshly cleaned. The Purple Heart pin lay flat and quiet against his chest. He sipped black coffee, glancing around the cafe, now humming with normal morning life, life filled with respect and shared memories. From that booth forward, the community had changed. And Raymond Clark, the man who never stopped serving, found his own kind of peace. Not from fanfare or fury, but from the simple truth that sometimes redemption doesn't roar. It rests silently in dignity, restored. 6 months after the cafe incident that changed everything, Raymond Clark had become more than a local hero. He had become a national symbol of dignity, redemption, and the quiet strength that defines true service. With the support of Greg Wells and a growing network of veteran advocates, Raymond accepted a new role as the director of a nonprofit foundation dedicated to helping veterans transition into meaningful civilian careers. What began as a single job offer turned into something far greater. Under Raymond's leadership, the foundation placed over 300 veterans into jobs within its first few months. Former soldiers, medics, engineers, and mechanics who, like him, had once felt overlooked and forgotten. Raymond understood their struggles firsthand, and he built the program around more than just resumes and interviews. He emphasized dignity, purpose, and the value of lived experience, ensuring that every veteran was seen not as broken, but as brave. His story spread rapidly, shared by media outlets, veteran organizations, and even local schools. Teachers used Raymond's journey to teach students about respect and sacrifice. His photo standing proudly in his suit, a Purple Heart pinned to his chest, was printed in textbooks and displayed in training presentations across the country. More than once, a young man or woman on the verge of giving up found new strength after hearing what Raymond had endured and how he rose from humiliation to become a beacon of hope. At the cafe where it all began, Raymond's table remained untouched each morning until he arrived. Veterans from out of state sometimes stopped in just to sit nearby and thank him. And though Raymond never sought attention, he greeted each one with the same quiet humility. In the end, Raymond Clark didn't become a hero because of medals or headlines. He became one because He chose to transform pain into purpose, to stand not just for himself, but for every unseen warrior still fighting battles long after coming home. And maybe that's the lesson we all need to hear. In a world moving too fast to notice the quiet ones, maybe it's time we slowed down and looked a little closer. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. They wear scars, carry burdens, and walk among us every day asking for nothing, but deserving everything. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below to thank a veteran in your life. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor the ones who serve in silence.